So we have 4 very interesting topics this morning. You might have noticed earlier on there was a slight change in the running order on the agenda, but the topics remain the same. So our speakers this morning will share with us how higher education institutions can work with local authorities within ETC funded projects. The second session will look at what we should be doing now to prepare for project funding calls. Then we'll have a quick coffee break, and when we return, we will hear what the priorities are going forward for the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy. And finally, we will hear about the launch of the Southern, Eastern and Midlands Regional Programme. So a big welcome to all our presenters this morning. We have Dr. Robert Egan, the DLR Active Travel Testbed, and Dr. Pat Reedy from Trinity College Dublin and the Enable Research Programme. We then have Maria Giovanni Laudani and Tim Cordy from Studio Laudani. And after the coffee break, we'll have Kevin Lynch and Enda Hogan, both from the Southern Regional Assembly. So our first session this morning is titled, How Third Level Institutions Can Provide Research to Support Local Authorities. So I'd like to introduce you to our presenters, Dr. Robert Egan and Dr. Pat Reedy. I'll invite you to turn on your cameras there, please, if you don't mind. So Dr. Robert Egan, the DLR Active Travel Testbed. Robbie is an interdisciplinary transport researcher who specialises in cycling. In particular, he has explored the experiences and practices of cycling in the car-dominant context of Dublin, the national cycling gender gap among second-level students, and cycle parking and logistics innovations that can help to mainstream cycling in Ireland. So his research focus is understanding the roots of car-centric mobility practices in Ireland and formulating measures that can help promote alternative mobility arrangements. And Dr. Pat Reedy. Pat is the Executive Director of the Enable Research Programme, focused on connected communities, and is hosted by the Connect Centre, which is SFI's research centre for future networks and communications in Trinity College Dublin. Prior to joining Enable, Pat held the role of Business Development and Commercialisation Manager for the Confirm Centre and for Smart Manufacturing based in UL. Pat has also previously worked with a number of Irish SMEs and a large UK-based PLC, where he held management roles in both national and international markets. So over to you, Robbie and Pat, for the first session this morning.
Perfect, Catherine. I'm going to go first in my slides first, Robbie, unless you want to change the slides. So if you want to move on to the next slide, please, Catherine. So guys, thanks so much for the opportunity to present this morning. We like Enable, I suppose, in terms of some background, it's a national research program started back in 2018. And again, I think the unique aspect of Enable is that you're bringing expertise from 3 of the SFI centres. So as Lisa mentioned in the introduction, you've got Connect, who are looking at the future of communications and future networks. You have Lero, who are looking at the Irish software research funded by SFI, and also then you have Insight, who are the Centre for Data Analytics. So you're pulling together competencies from 3 different centres to work on challenges in the area of mobility, buildings, environment, networks. I think it's very, very important in terms of having that ability to pull different expertise depending on the challenges that are there. And again, you know, what is very, very important, as Robbie will talk about later on as well, is engaging with the citizens and looking at actually how the technology is impacting citizens at their level. If you want to move on to the next slide. So again, what you hear was probably talk about quite a lot is this quadruple helix and trying to leverage that helix. So looking at, you know, the citizens, academia, government, industry, and how we can actually pull those four strands together and deliver research that has real impact at the back of it. And here you can see some of the partners, you know, from our work to date, from multinationals to SMEs to local authorities as well, which I think is sort of the focus of today's chat as well. It's been, I suppose, it's been very beneficial in having that quadruple helix. It's given real impact to the research that has been carried out and enabled to date, and it will do into the future also. So next slide again, Catherine. So in terms of the research framework, in terms of Enable, where we started and where we're going, so if you look at the diagram on the left, we've really worked on the sense, analyze, actuate, and then the citizen feedback paradigm, you know, so in terms of sensing, looking at what data is available, analysing that data, trying to gain insights from it, then using that to actuate, drive change, drive different, I suppose, behaviour, and then looking at the citizen feedback at the end. And I suppose something that we're seeing is maybe that feedback loop could actually has changed and will change in time in terms of having the citizen maybe at the left-hand side up front and at the very end as well also, so the citizen is more involved. Looking at the research in terms of the targeted projects, we'd have broken them down to areas like smart mobility, smart environment, smart networks and smart buildings. Again, that has changed and evolved over time as well, and will continue to do so as we move forward. Next slide, please, Catherine. So in terms of local collaboration with local government, we would have been quite successful in our work with the likes of the guys in Smart Dublin. And again, I won't go into it in massive detail today, but if you look at the programme that the guys have there in terms of the Smart Docklands, Smart ECU, Smart Dún Laoghaire, Smart Balbriggan and Smart D8, that's been driven by the guys in Dublin, and also we would have had quite a large input in terms of the research content into that over the last 4 to 5 years, and it's gone from strength to strength, and continues to grow to this day. Robbie will talk in detail around the Cargo Bikes project, and that was ran in Smart Dún Laoghaire over the past 18 months as well. But again, you know, there's different aspects to them, and depending on, like, the Smart D8 would be very focused on health and well-being. You know, mobility in Dún Laoghaire. You know, the Smart Docklands would have a lot of test bed trials in terms of 5G, Wi-Fi. You know, smart bins. Again, there's been a lot of different initiatives that have been driven by the guys in Smart Dublin, and we've backed it up in terms of the research. Next slide, please, Catherine. So then also in terms of Cork, we would have been involved in the Cork Smart Gateway. Again, I suppose it's very much EPE focused. When I say EPE, I mean education and public engagement. So working with various stakeholders in Cork, holding different webinars, raising awareness of the potential for you know, research to be carried out on different topics, you know, from 5G to using AR, VR, you know. So again, that's in the middle of actually working on the next phase as well as we speak also. And I suppose from our perspective as well, having the audience we have here today, again, we're very keen to drive this engagement further into the regions, you know. So again, you know, you saw Dublin and Cork there, but you know, you mentioned Kerry, you know, Waterford, Carlow. How can we engage with, you know, maybe local authorities, companies in the regions as well to drive research around mobility, you know, communications that we can help, and we're here to do so. So next slide, please, Catherine. So in terms of that, we have a team, I suppose, that are here to help with that collaboration. So you see the team there in the bottom in terms of Martin, Mark, Mike, and myself. And again, we offer a full project lifecycle management, and we work very much in a similar way as we were with our industry partners, from in terms of project scoping, defining projects, looking at resources, funding, all the execution and exploitation at the very end, you know. So I won't go into it in massive detail, but you know, you've got a team there to help support the liaison between the academics and the various institutions, between yourselves, between any industry partners that are there as well. And again, a very experienced team. All of the team there would have worked in industry ourselves prior to working in academia. So again, I would say that, you know, if you have any queries, just reach out. My email is at the very top of the slide deck as well. And we're more than happy to get involved in projects, or be that agnostic voice. You know, we're not here to try and sell the next generation of anything. I think that's the benefit people would have seen of engaging with the different centres, you know, that they're getting, you know, neutral advice. And again, what I would tell everybody as well, we're here if there's a fit. If there's not a fit, we're happy to create an introduction, facilitate an introduction with other centres as well who there may be a fit with. So next slide, please, Catherine. And again, look, some of the benefits of collaboration here. Again, these are not exhaustive by any means, but you know, you can sign into collaborative research projects. There's access to IP. There's potential to do internships, fellowships. Again, which is a massive thing in my opinion, is creating the next generation of talent in terms of PhD graduates and researchers that are coming into be it the public sector or coming into industry is a massive impact for people at the end of projects. Again, there's opportunities, you know, to look at, gain access to our test beds, attend lectures, and something I'll talk about a little bit later as well as partnerships in Horizon Europe also. So next slide, please, Catherine. So in terms of European funding programs, and I know that some of our speakers on after ourselves will speak a little bit more to this, but there's a massive opportunity there to gain funding. Again, it's very, very challenging, in terms of the success rate and getting funded, as I'm sure the guys will allude to later on. But the Horizon Europe program is active, and there's multiple calls happening at the moment. Again, as I said, we're still waiting on the 23-24 program to be outlined, but there's an example of the call there in terms of designing inclusive, safe, affordable, sustainable urban mobility, for example, as one that would have ran this year. Again, in terms of, like, if you look at the areas like the 100 climate neutral and smart cities, to which Cork and Dublin were chosen as part of that 100 city activation, I think there's massive opportunities there around that area as well. And we'd be very, very happy to chat to you and connect you with some of our guys, which I'll talk to you about in a second also. Next slide, please, Catherine. I think this is very, very interesting as well. Some other programs within the Horizon Europe that are run alongside. The Connecting Europe facility is something that I think would be very interesting for a lot of local authorities in terms of an idea of some of the calls there in terms of 5G coverage along transport corridors, 5G for smart communities, looking at backbone connectivity for digital global gateways. I think we've seen some local authorities already active in the space. So I think certainly it would be very interesting to get people involved. Again, it's co-funded, so if there's budget there from local authorities, there's an opportunity to get involved as well from that perspective, and there's co-funding from Europe. So again, would be very interesting. Again, the Digital Europe program is there as well. Again, there's again 9.2 billion in funding inside there. Again, look, these are all challenging programs, but I think given the position of the three centres here in terms of Connect, Insight and Lero, we're well facilitated to try and back those and bring in industry partners also. So if you want to hear a little bit about that, you can go to the next slide, please, Catherine. You could talk to the likes of Ruth and David, who are our funding diversification team in Connect. I have their emails up there also. They would have similar counterparts in Lero and in Insight as well, who are full-time in terms of bringing proposals together, bringing consortia together. And again, they're there to answer any questions that you may have around any of the calls that are there that you feel would be interesting. And again, this is done in a very collegiate way. If there's a fit, that's perfect. If not, we can put you in contact with the next people as well. That's the one thing I would say with everything that we do. If there's a fit, we're very happy to work together. If not, it won't be the hard sell coming from our side. I think that's pretty much me just going back into the community engagement, the final two slides. So this is something that's been very important to enable as we've grown over the past number of years. And again, it's quite challenging to do so. We would have worked closely with different sectors in terms of running webinars, mentoring, working with SMEs. If you go to the next slide as well, please, Catherine. Working with the citizen in terms of some of the projects that you see there in terms of the crowd access project. Looking at accessibility of footpaths, roads and stuff in Dublin. Again, looking at towards the Cool Planet experience. Again, looking at the challenges around climate change that we're all acutely aware of at the moment. And then more recently, looking at the food sharing in D8 through the work with Professor Anna Davies. And again, looking at the climate and the geopolitical instability and the surety of food supply, that's a huge challenge as well. So I think working with the community, I think for quite a while we've heard about the technology, new technology, next generation of X, Y, and Z. But what are the implications on the far end for us as communities? How can we build in the actual thought process of how this will affect the unintended consequences of technology also that may be less explored at times, So I think that's a unique aspect of the Enable program. And I think as we develop and move forward, maybe looking at themes like resilience, I think it will become more and more central to the actual research, and potentially bringing in other experts from the arts, humanities, social sciences as well to understand the actual the implications of technology along with the community. So so I think that's actually me now at this stage, Catherine. So thanks very much, guys, and I'll hand you over to Robbie.
So hi everyone, thanks very much for having me at this. I want to talk a bit about how higher education institutions can provide research support, particularly through illustrating it with the Dún Laoghaire Active Travel Test Bed, which is a project I've been involved in for now about a year and a half, supervised by Dr. Brian Caulfield, and then as well with working with my colleague Dr. Conor Dowding from Smart Dún Laoghaire. So next slide, please. So you can actually just go through the points, yeah. I'm going to be talking about three different aspects of this project. So one is cycle parking. So what this relates to is, I suppose, the kind of practical problem for local authorities, or the practical opportunity for local authorities, and DLR in particular, of cycling mobility infrastructure rapidly expanding during COVID. But not having, I suppose, cycle parking in general internationally is quite neglected as a form of cycle infrastructure. So the idea behind this project was trying to keep pace with mobility infrastructure improvements by looking at how we can innovate with cycle parking in particular. So that was one aspect of research support in the planning process of cycle parking and trials in particular. Then secondly, looking at cycle logistics. So a big focus for a lot of cycling policies at the local authority level and more broadly is on the mobility of people, the transport of people. But one aspect that's kind of there's increasing attention toward is the mobility of goods and the transport of goods. So what this project was about using a kind of partnership approach, bringing together private sector, the local authority and academia, and local businesses as well to trial out an e-cargo bike scheme where the bikes are provided by Bleeper. So that's kind of one of the main aspects of what I'm going to talk about today. And what we provided on the academic side is an evaluation of that program. And that program is actually, aspects of that program have been so successful that they've migrated to other local authorities like Dublin City Council and Fingal County Council. And some of you may have heard there's been some very generous supports now for e-cargo bikes from the government as well. So there seems to be a lot of movement in that area. And then lastly, what I've been looking at over the last few months, and it's been a focus for this year, will be looking at the actual practical challenge, and I suppose the challenge of public engagement that comes with reallocating road space, and particularly looking at cycle infrastructure planning in Dún Laoghaire. Next slide, please. I'll talk about the cycle logistics side of things first. So in the image to the left, you can see this is a promo for the e-cargo bike trial that took place in Dún Laoghaire that involved Bleeper Bike, who provided the e-cargo bikes and maintenance and kind of services around that. Then you have the local authority, Dún Laoghaire County Council, who provided a generous subsidy. Basically, local businesses in the area could rent out on a low risk basis e-cargo bikes for about 6 months to try them as an alternative to what was mainly used was cars and vans for deliveries. And there were a lot of food companies with this, pizza and cafes, and there's a great deal of success with this. And we analysed in particular 12 businesses that engaged in some of the most activity. And another aspect of what I'll be looking at this year briefly will be micro hubs. So there's a importance of the actual technology for delivering goods using cycling like e-cargo bikes, but also there's an important aspect, the actual logistics infrastructure that's required to enable this at scale. So what we'll be looking at is some kind of European case studies of trials that have happened with micro hubs, which are basically just neighborhood level goods hubs where they can be delivered by van or by e-van, for example, and then the last mile delivery can be implemented on foot or through an e-cargo bike, for example. So we're going to be looking at the feasibility of that. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of, so talking about that e-cargo bike project that we were looking at last year. This is just an example of some of the data that we analyzed. So in terms of evaluation, what we looked at in particular was patterns of use to try and understand, I suppose, journey lengths, the kind of the actual geographic patterns of travel as well, the speed of deliveries, some of the factors that enabled and were barriers to that, or I suppose seem to influence the use of the e-cargo bikes as opposed to the more traditional methods of the car, for example. And as you can see, Bleeper generously provided us data, tracker data from the e-cargo bikes themselves that showed where the start point was for a given journey, the different stop-off points, which in some cases were the actual delivery points, and then the finish point as well. So there's a very rich data set, and we were able to evaluate aspects of that. Next slide, please. Thanks. So that was one aspect, looking at the patterns of use. Another aspect then as well was, of course, because this is about climate action in part, was looking at the emissions. Did this actually work? Did it reduce emissions, and to what extent? So using some of the information on the vehicles that had been previously used, we looked at carbon emission savings from the trial of 12, and then estimating them for 50 companies, for example. So just trying to get a sense of, at scale, how much would this actually impact climate emissions from logistics for small businesses at the very least. Another aspect of that as well was looking at air pollutants. So you can see there PM 2.5, which is considered one of the most harmful air pollutants, and then nitrous oxide as well. And with the CO2 in particular, there was 1.92 tons of savings from about 1,800 stops. And then for 50 companies, then we estimated about 9.6 tons. Next slide, please. So the e-cargo bikes was one major aspect of what we were evaluating last year, and then we also looked at cycle parking planning, as I mentioned. So in the image to the left, you can see what's quite typical across Dún Laoghaire, which is open cycle parking, Sheffield stands. There are some other variations, but this would be the main one. And the vast majority of these would be, they'd be all across the county, and in more dense areas there would be a greater supply. A lot of them wouldn't have shelters, but there would be a great availability of cycle parking across the county, maybe some of the best in Ireland. But the idea behind this was trying to look at how we could build more secure, longer term parking facilities, especially considering the growth of e-bikes and other kinds of cycles that might require more protection, or people might be prepared to use more secure parking for. Next slide, please. So what we did was design a survey looking at different kinds of cycle practices, destinations people would go to using cycling for people who live, work, or visit DLR. And we disseminated this through the DLR website, and we got 574 respondents. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of some of the data that was gathered. So we used a platform called Survey123, which is part of ArcGIS. And we got to find out, I suppose, a lot of important contextual and practical behavioral information about participants. But we also got to ask them what kind of cycle parking type they'd like to see in DLR and where they would like to see it. So you can see here, each participant was able to provide 3 geo points. And this gave us an idea of where would be a good place or an optimal place to trial out some new forms of cycle parking. And you can see in the kind of northern end where the Dún Laoghaire Harbour is, there was actually a great concentration of points. And then using the heat map to the right, where you can see the kind of hotspots, Dún Laoghaire town once again stands out as a particular hotspot. So we decided to kind of zoom in and focus on this as at least a starting trial area. Next slide, please. And this was quite interesting because actually it has one of the most highest concentrations of cycle parking in the county. As I said, most of this would be open. So this suggested a demand for higher, more secure cycle parking facilities. And we were able to find with this kind of zoom in aspect of the mapping where particular destinations, the destinations around these particular demand hotspots. So you can see in the image to the right, there's a hotspot in the north. This is actually situated right on top of Dún Laoghaire train station. So we interpreted this as perhaps being used for multimodal journeys, or where people would like to engage in rail and cycle journeys. So cycle parking that would be suitable for long-term security would be prioritized. Then looking more southerly, you can see this is a bit more dispersed in terms of demand. This is one of the main kind of commercial areas of Dún Laoghaire town. So there's a mix of different destinations in that. So you need most likely a quite accessible or mixed parking that might be short and long term. So we suggested for this some kind of, I suppose, cycle compound or some kind of sheltered parking that enables both the flexibility and kind of shelter and security from the elements that you would need. And then to the right then, top right-hand corner, you can see this location is actually beside multiple leisure locations such as People's Park, Dún Laoghaire Pier. It's also not so far from a number of restaurants and the 40-foot swimming spot in Dún Laoghaire. And we used some mobility data to find out actually that the peak cycling flow around this area was generally on Saturdays and Sundays, suggesting leisure uses. So this would most likely be for a few hours and maybe on a weekend, so not spread across the week as such, maybe like multimodal journeys would be. So we suggested for this an upgrade of existing parking, for example, through shelters, and maybe the provision of something like a digital locker, which could cost a bit to use, but because they're just using it for a few hours one day a week, could be acceptable for people who might have more expensive bikes like e-bikes that they bring out in the weekends. Next slide, please. So finally, what we've been looking at this year is looking at patterns of cycle infrastructure support and opposition. So there's obviously a huge amount of finance at the moment for cycling infrastructure and active travel mobility infrastructure more broadly. And there's also a lot of design guidance and technical knowledge available. But one of the issues is that it's very actually difficult to get public support for the contentious element of road space reallocation. So this year we're looking at analysing public consultation responses, looking at patterns of opposition and support that can help improve the public engagement process and as well the public communication process of cycle infrastructure proposals. Next slide, please. Yep, that's everything. Thanks very much.
Introduce you to our speakers, Maria Giovanna Laudani, Chief Executive, and Tim Cordy, Co-Director of Studio Laudani. So I see, Maria, you've joined us on screen, and I'd like to invite Tim to join us on screen as well. So Studio Laudani is an Italian-owned company registered in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. It is directed by Maria Giovanna and Tim and specialises in designing and managing cooperation projects funded by the European Union. Although based in Florence, York, and now Cork, Maria Giovanni and Tim have a close and effective working partnership with complementary skills and outlooks. They step into their clients' worlds, understanding their problems, issues, and opportunities, and jointly defining projects that allow their clients to develop, grow, and maximise their access to EU grants and co-financing schemes. Maria Giovanna and Tim are both enthusiastic advocates of interregional cooperation projects with over 15 years' work experience. In the last 7 years alone, they have successfully developed, so designed or managed or implemented more than 10 Interreg Europe cooperation projects. So Maria Giovanna and Tim, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa. What a great introduction. Thank you. I'm sure you will enjoy my Italian accent, and I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you for this invitation. I'm Maria Giovanna and Tim. Tim, the floor is yours as well. You want to say something about you?
Hello. Not a lot really, because I think you'll learn a lot about who we are and how we work in this presentation, which is a little bit unusual.
Yes. So please, Catherine, next slide. Yes, who we are. I mean, already Lisa introduced us very well. Thank you, Lisa. And we in this slide we just report a definition, a sentence we really enjoyed from one of our best clients in France, defining us as good consultants, designing and managing European projects in a way which is really, we like to say, proactive. With our clients and partners, and we are really focused in helping public authorities and also agencies or NGO and university to cooperate together, especially in Interreg projects. So thank you, Pat and Robbie, for the previous presentation, giving an overview also about other research and European programs, because our focus is especially on Interreg, and in particular Interreg Europe is we are world expert in Interreg Europe. We really enjoy the bottom-up approach of the program. So our work is mainly in exchanging, helping public authorities to exchange good practices and experiences, and using applied research. So it's not research, but applied research. Yes, Tim, would you like to add anything else on our?
No, I think also Pierre meant that we could work very fast and we don't fall over. So yeah, it's a really nice recommendation, we thought. Yes. So we work fast and we don't fall over.
Yeah, yeah. So next slide, please. Okay, here we are. We want to avoid boring presentations. We like to be proactive, as I said. So this is a little game we prepared. We thought about a few sentences we met in our experience, and we would like to ask you, the audience, to vote for your favorite. Read them carefully. They are all from our favorite writers or philosophers, or just experience. And if you just read them in 1 minute, and then you can vote your favorite sentence, and then we will have a list of the most popular and less interesting, and we will start from the most popular one.
So, dear Lisa, can you help us to organize this, Catherine? Oh, look at that. The Irishman, well ahead of everybody else.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Okay. We got the first, the most popular is only do people are brilliant at breakfast. You guess who said that?
Oh, yeah.
It's Oscar Wilde. Yes. Okay, we start with this one. So we really like this sentence. We met this in, as you know, one of the most popular comedy made by Oscar Wilde, and we like this sentence because we always encourage lead partner, especially lead partners, to be pirate, to be innovative, and we don't really like boring people, don't we, Tim? What do you think?
No, we don't, and really you need to be a bit different, I think, to make a project come together. So we find that we are working with what we call pirates, people who can achieve something slightly different within their organization, and they have a motivation which carries them through all the difficulties. Something that turns them into a leader is what we're really looking for. So at one level, yeah, if you don't get up at breakfast time, that's fine. But on the other hand, you could say to Oscar, well, the early bird catches the worm. And in that sense, the sooner you start to develop your idea, the better you will develop it. You don't wait for the call to be announced. The slide 2 back that Lisa showed us, already you know the dates for the next Interreg Europe call. It won't actually open until April, March, can't remember. So you've got March, 4 or 5 months now to get on and do something. Start preparing now. So in that sense, don't be dull. Do get up, be brilliant at breakfast, but concentrate on being brilliant. That's the point.
Yeah, it's also important that you always try to match the program priorities with what you want to do, because you need to be innovative. So you don't have to recycling, let's say, to recycle your old ideas because they are boring. They are the same. They're programmed so that many times, and so you need to be innovative, check the priorities, see what is the investment the commission want to focus, and then be creative. So, for example, there is a huge budget at the moment on sustainable development, any sector, let's say, from mobility management to energy, and also other creative ways. You know, if you want to work on health, it doesn't need to be exactly health. The priority can be something different, and you can, you know, mix and match the ideas. So that's why we always say, let's be, you know, pirates. Let's be creative. Let's try to you know, prevent the possible. Think about the possible opportunities, and so this is why we inserted this sentence.
Can I have the last word, Maria Giovanna, before
yes,
we invite
please.
the next question? Always remember to make sure that what you're doing is supported by your key decision makers. Yeah. So whether that's your immediate line manager just in a management system, or it's the politicians in your organization, make sure they are on side. Why? Because certainly with Interreg Europe, which is what we specialize in, they are 4-year projects. And so if you're thinking of starting, you know, designing a project now, the whole process will last at least 5 years, 1 year to prepare and have it evaluated. And then if you're successful, it starts and off you go. So unless it's well embedded in your organization's priorities, you can find, and we've met this with partners sometimes, that all of a sudden, priorities change and it's no longer an easy task to make it work. So be brilliant, but be smart as well.
Okay, so let's go to the second most popular one. I can't remember. It's number 4, I think. My cube will delight you. And yeah,
Ooh,
and I think
this is me.
It's your turn, Tim. You invented.
Yes, yeah. We all know what a Rubik's Cube looks like, and actually this is an invented quote, I have to confess, because we just love the idea. It's about your consortium, basically, yeah. And this is another one where you start early. You start early and you start often, and you be as what's the word, as demanding as you can be, as ambitious. So if we take the example of Interreg Europe, the same applies, we think, to all ETC programs. We know, for example, that the Atlantic area, nice and simple, you must have a partner from each of the 4 member states represented in the program. So it's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you fail to find a French partner, then all the rest of your work is wasted because you don't meet that simple basic criterion. With Interreg Europe, it really is a Rubik's Cube, because you must have at least 1 partner from each of the 4 zones of Europe, north, south, east, and west. You need to have at least 50% of your partners who are improving their own policy instrument. We haven't talked about that yet, but it'll come up, I'm sure, in a later discussion. And you have to have at least 1 ERDF policy instrument being improved. So you imagine twisting, all the combinations around. Okay, so we've got a Hungarian and a Bulgarian partner. Okay, is that okay for the East? Oh, but neither of them are doing ERDF. So we have to look to the ERDF for somewhere else. How many of these are improving their own policy instruments, which is a discrimination if we think this is a new thing for this program, the discrimination against intermediate bodies like energy agencies in particular. They will find it harder to be involved in this program. But to get it all correct, we think you have to be really, it's about safety first. So the first call's already happened. We did 2 proposals, and we had a huge panic with one of them because it was like the Flying Dutchman, the ship that never lands. It was going from port to port saying, please, will you improve the ERDF policy instrument? It almost failed because we couldn't find a satisfactory formula. In the end, we did. But the point of this little number, and now I'll stop and Marie-Giovanna can improve on what I've said, it's all about making sure that you've got exactly what is needed for the consortium. Because if you don't, you'll just, all your hard work will be thrown away. It won't make it through the first evaluation step. What a waste.
Yes.
What have I left out, Marie-Giovanna?
Yeah. No, well, I confirm everything. And it's really important you choose your partners. You work very hard. You try to get on board the right partners for the project. Again, we come back to the question, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your project? And according to the answer to this question, then you have to create the consortium. And this is really important that you select as a lead partner the partners you want to work with, because it will be a quite long cooperation and must be productive. It must get some results, and this is really important. We move to the next. Yes, Tim, I think we need to go to the next.
We do, yes. If just tiny moment, prompted by an earlier remark. Yes, by all means attend these seminars and so on that are being organized by the programs, but also do things your own way. So this comes back to Oscar Wilde and being brilliant at breakfast and basically all the time. So don't just use the networking events that the programs offer. Do other things. Do something weird. Find some networks that European networks. Get in touch with them that have nothing to do with the program itself. Who's your municipality twinned with? for example, silly, creative ideas like that to make it a bit different. We find using professional networks like LinkedIn is actually quite good. You have to work really hard, but you get results.
Yeah, and also, we usually, as experts, to find the right partners, we prepare an expression of interest for the lead partner to ask to the potential partners of the project the right questions. So it's maybe the most beautiful city in the world you want to engage in your project, but they don't have the right expertise to work in your idea. So this is really a strong recommendation we want to give to all the potential lead partners. So we move to the other point, which is the answer is the question. Oh God, I love this book of Alejandro Jodorowsky. It's a wonderful book. I suggest to all the participants to read it. It's really a bit mad, but really interesting, because I asked my dear colleagues, so what is the golden rule when you write an application form?
You answer the question.
Okay, golden
You
rule
answer
number one.
every question.
Yes,
Yeah,
and golden rule number two. Golden rule number two is you answer the question, and golden rule number three is you answer the question and you try to answer to the questions respecting the number of characters in the application form. For example, now we know that both Northwest Europe and Interreg Europe and also Atlantic area, they have reduced the number of characters in every questions they ask, every question they ask in the application form. So you only have very limited space to say to the program what you want to do, and you have to do in that small space. You can't use more than 500 characters or 100 words. And this is what we also, when we prepare the documents to assemble the consortium and to prepare the proposal, we put all these limitations in every question. The other very strange approach to the Interreg programs, all of them, is that they usually ask more questions in one question. So read the questions very carefully, because sometimes you have 1,000 characters and you use 999 to answer just the first, and then there are the two in the same box you haven't answered, and then you fail. I mean, sometimes we also got bad experiences, and we were rereading or reading the evaluation feedback. We're saying, oh, well, but we didn't answer all the questions exactly. So this is another golden rule we want to give to all the potential lead partners. And Tim, maybe you want to add any other tips?
Well, yes, I can say something that, well, you can, because you are now honorably, bilingual, but everybody who has native English has a huge advantage, but also the disadvantage of being able to write very complex sentences. Don't do it. Just remember that your proposal is going to be evaluated by somebody who quite probably does not have English as their first language. And secondly, they have a lot of work to do. So help the evaluator is a really strong recommendation. Signposts, short sentences, clear answers, no sub-clauses and sub-clauses. Keep the sentences short, keep the ideas clear. Make sure that if there are 3 questions, you actually use a few characters to say, right, so I'm answering sub-question number 1 here, sub-question number 2, so on. Just make it easy, make it clear. Get the answer very clear.
Great. So we move to the other one, Another Brick in the Wall. This is a very famous song by Pink Floyd. Everybody knows that. And you imagine this is to break barriers. And we love Interreg programs because they really help to cooperate. And remember that all Interreg Europe, all Interreg programs, I mean, different percentage maybe in different programs, but basically all of them, they are about policies. So they want to have an impact in the system, changing policies especially. And so this is really important, because we are not talking about building infrastructures or you know, bridges and streets or other things. It's about ideas. And the interregional learning is absolutely essential to plan your policy and to have an impact in the future strategy of your cities or regions or organizations. So that's mainly the point. And when you exchange good practices, it's really complicated sometimes, because how can you import? Supposing you are in Ireland and you go to Italy and you want to import something from Italy, it's very difficult, because you can import something like an apple or, you know, grapes or food or other physical things. You have to import ideas, and this is really complicated. So our suggestion is to, you know, change, you know, make a little hole in the wall and change from small actions, starting with small actions, maybe a pilot, maybe something very simple, and then try to make it successful, so you can expand this step by step in your area using your culture, your ideas, your potentials. So it's really complex, and sometimes we had bad experience, very good experiences, but always it was worth to do it, because there was an impact in the system. And Tim, you want to add anything else on this? We have a few minutes left.
Well, I suppose the wall, it's like the wall is you can see the wall as being the whole project as well. So you can imagine that you're going to be putting bricks in. The wall you have to design, it has to match what the program wants. You know, so in Interreg Europe, you're doing capacity building, yeah. You're demonstrating how you're doing that you're doing it through interregional learning, and the outcome is improved policy instruments. And that's a whole methodology which we haven't got time to discuss now, but you have to get this right. Otherwise you're building the wrong wall, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could be another point of view. Thank you, Tim. Think about that. And finally, don't work for money, make it work for you. That's the motto of my dear colleagues. So Tim, would you like to say what it is?
Yeah, of course you want the money, and the money is quite good. You know, it's 80% co-financing. These are relatively small projects, or 2 million euros maybe. We're not going to talk about the budget; it's too complicated in so much time. Maybe if your organizers want, we can have a special session on that on a future occasion. Meanwhile, make it work for you is the important bit. Yeah, make it a project that is fulfilling the objectives of your organization. Back to the point at the earlier moment, beginning, get your key decision makers involved. Make sure it's something really, really central. And then the glorious thing about this program is it manages to be amazingly flexible. So you have your project approved, and lots of things are still unclear. You have a work program, of course, it's set out semester by semester. It's still not, you know, very precise. And it's a grown-up program, so they know that changes happen. You know, political changes happen, personnel changes happen. You know, they were so good over COVID. I mean, we don't have time, but they were wonderful the way they reacted to all the projects that were being hit by COVID. A really good example of how they helped to make it work for us. But we say this to all the projects, we say it to the partners as well, the lead partner in particular. And being the lead partner, this is the big advantage of being a lead partner, okay? It comes with a price tag, but it comes with a huge benefit as well. And you make it work for you not in the money sense. That's not really important. You can be very clever, wonderful. But the really good thing is you make it work for your organization and for all the others in the partnership. Right, sorry, lecture over.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Back to you. Sorry we used a little bit more time, but there is so much to say, you know. Here is just the list with the potential project, with the previous project we worked in Interreg Europe in particular. And yes, have a look at the European Interreg Europe website or all the other websites. There is a huge material there. You can have a look. And I think that's all from our side. So we are happy to answer questions. And here are our email addresses if you want to get in touch with us.
So Kevin is Assistant Director, Senior Planner with the Southern Regional Assembly, with responsibility for the development and implementation of the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, so what we call here the RESIS. Kevin has over 30 years experience in planning, ranging from regional planning in Ireland and Scotland, development management, policy development and heritage with Cork City, Cork County, Limerick, Donegal and Westmeath County Councils, and dealing with planning appeals across Ireland with An Bord Pleanála. He has extensive experience in European projects and policy implementation. So this morning, Kevin is joining us via audio, so you won't be able to see his video, but he's going to provide us with an update on the implementation of the regional, spatial and economic strategy and priorities for the future. So Kevin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, apologies there that you won't see my lovely face. I had some glitch, so I'm doing this by audio on my phone, but I'm sure it'll suffice. What I want to do here is really set a kind of a high-level overview of regional, spatial and economic planning in the southern region, what the structures are, primarily going back to the RESUS, which was adopted in January 2000. We've had over 2 years under our belt in relation to that. We've completed our first 2-year report. So what I want to do is set a kind of a high-level overview on a recap on what national and regional policies are in relation to the country, how we've done in relation to implementation of that, and some early lessons that we think apply in relation to that process. So next slide, please, Catherine. So yeah, just to recap on where we fit in this really goes back to Project Ireland 2040, which is the national planning framework allied to the National Development Plan. It goes back to 2018. It charts progress for the country over the next 20 years and allies spatial change in the country to government spending. And I suppose the key point to come back to in relation to that is that there will be a 1 million additional population at least in the country in the next 20 years, of which 50% will be natural growth and 50% will be in migration. And taking account of environmental, social and other factors, and that sheer level of growth in the country requires a long-term change. So we fit in with that as the mediating level between the national and then the local. Next slide, please. I suppose at the core of the national planning framework is, as I say, the fact that there will be at least an additional 1 million people in the country in the next 20 years. The focus of the national planning framework is the fact that the trajectory of growth in the state since independence and even prior to that has been towards the Dublin region. The focus of the NPF, if you boil it down simply, is a 50-50 split in growth in the country between the Eastern and Midlands region and the Northern West and our Southern region. And that's largely built on the platform of the regional cities, which is of particular interest to us because we have 3 of the 4 cities with Waterford, Cork and Limerick and Galway in the Northwest. So the strategy itself focuses on very significant growth targets there, 50% growth over the next 20 years in those, as well as a whole host of rollouts at the level below that, much of which was dealt with through the regional, spatial and economic strategy. There's a focus on development of brownfield land, of compact growth, of increasing densities in towns and cities in order to maximize more sustainable transport and a more sustainable, I suppose, spatial layout to the country, which has largely been at a very dispersed level. Next slide, please. So we focus in now on the RESUS itself. And I suppose what's important about this, there has been various regional strategies over the years. What differentiates this from previous strategies is the fact that it has a statutory basis. So that is actually important in terms of setting the agenda for local planning. So our overall purpose is to translate the national planning framework down to a regional level, taking on board, I suppose, the various geographies we have and the various requirements within that. So what's important about the RESIS is it sets the framework for all the various county and city development plans, which have been working their way through over the last 2 years, and it will set the agenda for the local economic and community plans, which are coming up. Another key initiative and innovation of them is that they contain metropolitan area strategic plans. So what characterizes the 3 cities is the fact that they don't have a unified boundary. Waterford has a significant proportion of the city is impacted largely in Kilkenny. Cork metropolitan area extends into the county, notwithstanding recent boundary extensions. Similarly, in Limerick, Clare comes very close into the city centre in Limerick. So there's never been a formal coordination mechanism between them, and the RESIS includes that. So I suppose, again, the key thing with the RESIS is that focus of changing the trajectory of growth within the state. Next slide, please. I won't get into the full detail of the strategy, but it boils down to, it is quite a simple strategy. It focuses on the 3 metropolitan areas, targets 50% growth within those. It identifies 14 key towns across the region, which are also targeted for significant growth. And then there's significant policies on other rural areas and other towns within that, and that connects then through to the rural areas. A particular innovation of our RESIS, I think, is that we emphasize the networks between our towns and villages, and those connections as a positive that can be built on into the future. It's also, the focus has been on the spatial side over the last number of years, largely in terms of where we are with the city and county development plans, but it's also statutory economic strategy. And there's 5 key elements to that, which links back to the settlement strategy. There's an emphasis on placemaking for enterprise development. That's largely improving our overall environment of the region as a place to live and work, and that in of itself enhances economic development. That's knowledge diffusion, capacity building, clustering, and smart specialization. So these are the themes of which the economic strategy is built on. I suppose coming back to the key point, our critical agenda is sustainable growth of our region, and at the same time changing the trajectory growth to the Dublin region within the state. That's not a pejorative thing against Dublin. That is good for Dublin as well, and that's within the Eastern and Midlands strategy, that there will be a reduced level of growth to the Dublin region. So that targets within the southern region a growth of nearly 400,000 people by 2040. And as I say, part of that then, it's not just growth for its own sake, it's a change in the nature of that growth with a focus on creating low carbon, climate resilient society. Next slide, please. Hi, Catherine. Next slide. And the next slide, I've actually jumped forward myself, apologies. Okay, so I suppose when you look at the lots of documents of policies and objectives that sound very ambitious, when we were dealing with the RESIS, we tried to put in what would the region look like in practice in 20 years' time if we achieved what we wanted. And these are what we call our key enablers. So I won't go through all of them, but in terms of revitalizing the rural areas, developing the 3 cities to the targets, developing the key towns were outlined there in blue. Particular objective in, say, Waterford, developing a concentric city, because the development of the city has been skewed, I suppose, over centuries by administrative boundaries. Improving our environment and heritage, creating a learning region, regeneration of Limerick Shannon, including the development of Northern Distributor Road, developing the Cork Docklands, and delivering on our targets. Next slide, please. So that was the objectives and strategies, a summary of what's in the RESIS itself. And that found its way, that was done through significant, I suppose, public consultation, and was very much influenced by the local authorities. And it's important to say, I suppose, that this was the first such strategy. So this was a new process for a lot of people. And I think an outcome of that was that, particularly from the local authorities' point of view, there was a natural tendency for them to want a lot of content about their local authorities, which is reasonable in one sense, but not particularly the focus of a regional document. So we ended up with quite a lot of objectives, over 301 objectives, to target those overall points I was making. A lot of these are very broad ranging. They involved a mix of actions and stakeholders. And we were left then, when the RESIS was done, with trying to work our way through actually implementing that, and in the context of having limited resources. So we worked through a process of, for the first 2 years, working on 32 specific actions. And we analysed the objectives in the RESIS into ones which were active, which are ones that we could take control of ourselves, ones which were instructive, which, because of the statutory basis of the RESIS, required others, particularly local authorities, to implement what we said, and supportive, which are ones where we put our shoulder to other groups and initiatives at a national or local level for implementation. Next slide, please. So what I've done there is outlined what was in the RESIS and how how we analyze it then for implementation. And I'll just, for the next few slides, give you an overview of where we think we are after 2 years with the implementation of those 32 actions. So a key part was setting up the actual implementation structures, and we agreed that with the members 2 years ago. And that has been done, and that has been done quite successfully. Another part of it was the establishment of various delivery boards and stakeholder groups, partly due to COVID and partly due to the fact we had needed to get stuck in. That hasn't developed as much as we would have liked, and that is one we need to come back to. So that has only partially been successful. But I would say, as this is a long-term learning process, given we have very limited resources, a huge amount of our energy could have been put into feeding the administration of these structures. Not developing them to the extent we thought has allowed us to actually get on with the work. So it's a double-edged sword. MASP implementation, this is the metropolitan areas, was a significant target for us because of the focus on the 3 cities. And the agenda of the targets for their growth, we felt there was need for very significant implementation there. So we drew up a strategy for implementation across the 3 cities. We put a lot of work into this, and we consulted with the local authorities. There already is a very well developed structure in Cork through CASP, and we made particular success, I think, in Waterford, where together with the two chief executives there, we put together a proposal for a permanent office for the development of the MASP area. I'd say that a lot of good work was put in there, but this has been, I suppose, largely taken over through the review of the National Development Plan, which talks about establishing city development boards. So we kind of were one step ahead of the department in relation to that, and as they are the body who will be coordinating the funding, it's with them at the moment. So I think we've done good groundwork there, but it hasn't got as far as we wanted, and it's one we need to keep an eye on. Establishing and agree regional indicators and monitoring. This is, I think, a key one for us, where we needed to know how could you measure actual success with the RESAs. And we'll be launching at the end of the month, together with our sister regional authorities in EMRA and the Northwest, the Regional Development Monitor, which I think will be a very exciting piece of work, where we will host on a platform verified national data across a range of issues in relation to the environment, social issues, unemployment, population. All those information are out there through a various range of bodies, but it's very difficult to find them. So we will be hosting a platform, an online platform that will be open to anybody to interrogate, setting out across a whole series of indicators that will be useful to people, probably useful directly in your work on a national, regional and local basis. So that's definitely a box ticked. Another area was important to us was collaboration between the metropolitan areas, Cork, Limerick, Shannon, Waterford and Galway, because their targets are so high and that level of growth has not been achieved historically. We felt there was a need to cooperate between them. That has been underway, but there is a natural tendency within each city, obviously, to work in competition with each other. So that's one that we need to work on as well, but there has been early progress there. Next slide, please. The development plan process that we've been working through, the 10 local authorities on their development plans, and as I say, this is an instructive one where they have a statutory obligation to row in with the RESAs, and at this stage all those development plans are through, and from our perspective they have satisfactorily brought on board the targets that are in the RESAs. In relation to blue-green infrastructure, this is another key initiative of ours which has been recently launched, which is where we set out, again based on the European project, where we set out a framework for development of infrastructure based on blue-green and nature-based solutions. So that's available on our website, and we've launched a network there. So there's significant success in relation to that one. Similarly, we coordinate very well with the CAROs, and they take the lead on that, but we're very much involved in that. On sustainable mobility, again through a European project, we developed a pilot initiative looking at the development of 10-minute towns, and we looked at Ennis, Carlow and Tralee. And so we produced, again, a framework for local authorities on that, and this work has developed out, and that we're now involved with the Department of Transport on their Pathfinder initiatives there. Developing bidding capacity, I would say we've not worked as much as we would have liked in relation to this, but I mean, developing the ETC network would be a part of that process. We haven't had the resources to have a dedicated person within that, but I think in overall terms across the Assembly, it has been achieved. Regional initiatives, we recently launched our Learning Region Action Plan, again a very significant initiative in relation to promotion of the region. That has one that has been advanced. Smart specialization, again, another initiative that we've launched, and we're now working on the development of a smart region. One area we haven't really worked on enough, I think, is development of the Eastern Corridor, which is a priority for development between Belfast, Dublin and down to Rosslare, and that's one that needs additional work. We've commenced work on various transport strategies, freight, ports and harbours and airports. They're not developed yet, but they are in process. Our regional decarbonisation plan, that essentially has been put to one side due to the climate action plan, where the regional assembly has a specific a job in that in relation to the development of regional renewable electricity strategies. Our regional landscape strategy, we've put that to one side because that needs to be developed at the national level first. So I think that's an overview of the specific actions we've been involved in. If I was to encapsulate then, I would say in terms of successes, I think at this stage there is now substantial policy alignment between the national, the regional and the local in relation to spatial planning. There's work to be done in other areas. There has been significant investment by a range of public bodies and government on lots of initiatives over the last 2 years. I think our government spending on these is at a high level in European context. So there has been a lot of investment, and there has been significant initiatives by the Regional Assembly ourselves. Let's reference the Development Monitor, MASP implementation, the Learning Region Initiative, Smart Southern Region Initiatives, 10-minute towns and the Blue-Green Infrastructure Initiatives. So there has been a lot of positives, but if you look at what our overall target is, there are concerns. The trajectory of there's no particular, at this early stage, indication that the 50-50 split that's fundamental to the Project Ireland process is being reached. The preliminary results from the census are concerning because they actually show growth across the whole country, but very significant growth in the Dublin region, which grew by approximately 120,000 in a 6-year period. That's 1.5 times the size of Waterford through all of history. So that's 120,000 citizens in one area. So that is concerning, but that also shows the challenge we're up against, that trajectory. Now, our region has grown within that period, and Carlow, Waterford and Wexford in particular show particularly positive signs there. But those, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, those concerns do lead to an overarching concern, I suppose, in that from our perspective, there'll always be criticisms of various strategies, but Project Ireland 2040, the National Planning Framework, has a lot of merit to it in its simplicity. And also there is the fact that you should stick with it to see if it works from our perspective. And so there's a danger, I think, at this early stage, when you have trends like the continued growth of the Dublin region, that there's kind of mission creep, that people say, oh, we need to throw this out and start again, or we need to focus on addressing those issues within the Dublin region. Our perspective would be that you do need it. We're at the very early stages, that you do need to stick with it. Next slide, please. This slide shows really kind of what we're up against in terms of investment, and you can see there that the regional cities, while having 25% of the population, have only 14% of the projects. So that's what we need to overcome. And similarly, the level of investment within the 3 regions is not matching the 50-50 split that's required through the National Planning Framework. Next slide, please.
Kevin, I'll just give you the 2-minute mark if that's okay.
Okay, so as I say, we're only 2 years into the process, but where we see high-level concerns is that there is certainly significant investment, but it's unclear if there's kind of the structural changes to focus that investment in a way that will harness change is actually there. Much of the initiatives at the moment focus on a variety of spending money in various areas or on zoning. There are, it would seem to us that there are other factors that feed into long-term change, and that they should be taken into account. Also, the funding mechanisms that are there are very much project focused, are very much competitive. Be our view, for long-term change, you need a long-term budgeting mechanism or a 10-year fund or whatever for our cities and our local authorities to make the actual change required. Next slide, please.
Kevin, if you don't mind, I'll just ask you a question because we're coming up to time, and I know you're going to talk about recommendations, but it would be great just to hear how the RESUS ties into EU projects. So I know you touched on briefly the Blue-Green Initiative and also the 10-minute towns, which came, I suppose, through EU projects. So in terms of our ETC network members who are here, who are maybe thinking of new projects and that they'll take up and begin in the new funding call, what kind of projects would you recommend for them to undertake to continue to implement this new RESUS?
I suppose anything, as you say, the areas we've made progress in over the last 2 years have, bar one, have all come through EU projects, and they have significantly allowed us to advance in those areas. I think the areas of importance going forward would be particularly in renewable energy. There's huge targets there to be achieved. It's an area of work on a statutory basis that we are now involved in. How you unlock those. Apologies there, I have my mechanic on the phone as I'm speaking. So I would say certainly in the area of renewable electricity, I think developing out the whole education piece and the learning piece that we've worked through the learning region, connecting through to the new technical universities as well, and consolidating those is very important. I think there's a huge area in the whole climate action area, and sustained transport as well would be key areas that I'd highlight.
Brilliant. And there's just one question in from the chat that I'd like to address with you. So in terms of smart region, because you mentioned smart specialization earlier in your presentation, but in terms of smart region, could you give us a sense of, with the RESUS in place, of course, what that idea amounts to and where it could go in terms of, especially in terms of grassroots?
Well, I'm certainly not the expert in relation to smart specialization, but as I understand it, and where we have, like, where we will be going with this, we in terms of the work we've done, Cork and Limerick have done significant work in relation to this, and what we want to do is broaden out that work through to beyond the cities to the local areas, and that involves harnessing the new available technology with community involvement and economic involvement in identifying what works best at a local area, be that in the economic or social sense. So through that process, you know, there's kind of a view that Ireland is a small country and that we just, you know, we work on one economic model, but that's not that's not how it happens in practice. Each area down to a very local level has particular skills and resources that can be brought out. And I think that's the area it'll work in practice. It's harnessing that local knowledge and community involvement with available new technologies to bring forward that insight. And I think that is a key area. It's highlighted through Europe as well. So I think that there is good prospects there.
Yes, brilliant. And it'll definitely be specific to the region, I guess, and to the different area. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. We've come to the end of the time this morning, so I'm sorry to have cut your presentation ever so slightly short, but the slides will be available afterwards. And thank you so much for making the time to join us this morning.
Okay.
So thank you so much. So finally, I'd like to introduce our final presentation this morning. So our final presenter is Enda Hogan. So I'd like to invite Enda to turn on his camera and his mic and join me on screen, please. So Enda was appointed Assistant Director of the Southern Regional Assembly in early 2022. He heads up the EU Programmes Division, which includes the teams responsible for the ERDF regional programmes, First Level Control, Interreg Northwest Europe and EU projects. He and his team have been heavily involved in the design of the new ERDF regional programmes in Ireland. And Enda will share with us how the new Southern, Eastern and Midlands regional programme will focus on technological university capacity building, supporting research and innovation, residential energy efficiency and regeneration of key towns in our regions. So over to you, Enda.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning. I'm assuming you can hear me and you'll stop me if you can't. So thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm the Assistant Director here in the Southern Regional Assembly. And look, it's very timely that I talk on this particular topic this morning. This programme has been quite some time in development. Some of you who've been following it along the way know how long this takes. And it is with the Commission now. It has been approved by government here in Ireland, and we're waiting for any day for what's called the formal adoption of the programme. So look, I'll talk to that again in a second. You might go to the next slide, please. So look, the topics I'll address in my presentation, I know some of you have covered some of this before, maybe at previous events, but I just wanted it to be somewhat comprehensive. So I'll start just by outlining the NUTS2 regions and how the programme areas were decided and the various managing authorities involved. I'll talk about the funding allocations that have been made to the ERDF, and I'll also touch on the Just Transition Fund, EU Just Transition Fund, and where the money and the co-financing comes from. I'll talk briefly on the regional programme design, so how we came about, how we designed this particular programme that I'm going to share with you at a high level, and then I'll get into the programme itself, so give you a preview of the programme and what it looks like. And finally, then just I suppose a quick oversight of the type of funding calls that will launch from the programme and the next steps for us as a managing authority. Okay, so look, there are 3 NUTS2 regions in Ireland. People who've been involved in this space for some time will appreciate that previously there were 2 NUTS2 regions. So we're still closing out a regional programme for what was called the Southern and Eastern region, which was a previous NUTS2 region. And our colleagues up in the Northwest are closing out a programme for the BMW, the Border Midland region. Those NUTS2 regions changed, and this is reflected now in the I suppose the regional programme composition now. So in fact, of the 3 NUTS2 regions, the Northern and Western region, which you see at the top left of the map there, is a region in transition. So that's slipped backwards in terms of GDP, and effectively that has now become a region in transition. The other 2 regions, NUTS2 regions, the Southern region and the Eastern and Midland region, are both classified as more developed regions. So in October 2020, the Minister Michael McGrath wrote to the 2 regional assemblies, the one in the Northwest and ourselves in the South, and advised us that there would be 2 regional programmes going forward. There'd be a Northern and Western regional programme, which just covers that region in transition, and that attracts a 60% ERDF co-financing rate. And then the other regional program, the other program area, covers the southern, eastern and Midland regions. So it covers those two NUTS2 regions as more developed regions, and there's 40% ERDF co-financing. I just mentioned in passing that there's a third fund called the EU Just Transition Fund, which there's one JTF program, and that's in targeted territory that I suppose there was an exercise carried out over quite some time, identifying the target territory to be addressed by the EU Just Transition Fund, and that is a large amount of it falls into the Midland, Eastern Midland region, but it does creep into the other regions as well. And that Just Transition program is 50% co-financed, and it's funded under Next Gen EU. Okay, so ERDF managing authorities. So there are still just two ERDF managing authorities. Ourselves here in the Southern Regional Assembly, we are the managing authority for the Southern, Eastern and Midland Regional Programme. And then our colleagues in the Northern and Western Regional Assembly are the managing authority for the Northern and Western Regional Programme. New, I suppose a new innovation here is that the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly have been appointed the managing authority for the first time, and they are now the managing authority for the JTF programme. So that's a new responsibility for them. And look, those of you who work with us would know that the three regional assemblies work very closely together in lots of respects, certainly in the planning side that Kevin was talking about, and in the development of those RESAs for each of the regions, but also very much on the EU side. So we've worked together in terms of program design, and we'll continue to collaborate with each other in terms of program implementation. Okay, next slide, thanks. So the scale of the funding. The Southern, Eastern and Midland Regional Programme has ERDF funding of 265 million, and then that's co-funded with National Exchequer funds of 398 million. So the total size of the programme over the 10 years of the programme is 664 million. So it's a sizable enough programme. And you'll see there, again, I just mentioned that those, because the two regions in the programme area are more developed, the co-funding is ERDF 40% and national 60%. The Northern and Western Regional Programme has an ERDF of 130 million and national co-financing of just under 87 million. So the total programme size for a much smaller programme area is 217 million. And finally then the EU Just Transition Fund programme has 84 million JTF, so EU funding, and 84 million national co-financing. Okay, next slide, thank you. So the background in terms of program design, there are a whole load of different things that I suppose we're required to take into account, and actions that we have to take in terms of designing these regional programs. So we would have carried out needs analysis, there was public consultation, and then there were policy documents there already, and then some emerging policy documents that had a huge influence on the program. So for us as regional assemblies, a starting point for ourselves was to look at the regional, spatial and economic strategies. So for the Southern, Eastern, Midland Regional Programme, for example, we were looking at the RESAs for the Southern region, but also the RESAs for the Eastern and Midland region. We also looked at the country reports that are produced by the Commission, so the 2019 report and the 2020 report in particular. And within the 2019 report, they set out recommendations as to where the funding, the ERDF funding, should be directed. We had Indicon carry out an independent needs analysis, or rather the member state had one carried out for both ERDF and ESF. And when that was published, then there was a public consultation. We had consultation workshops, and then published a report arising from that. And they were really identifying both the potential areas that we could address and priority areas arising from both the public consultation and the needs analysis. Some of the I suppose, key policy documents that we had to take into account. Well, the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, that is under the new recovery and resilience framework. So a substantial amount of EU funding that wasn't there in 1420 is now available to Ireland. And the NRRP, I suppose, had to get out the gate ahead of ourselves, and it did influence. I suppose there are certain actions and large-scale projects that are funded under the NRRP that we had to consider in the design of our programs, both in terms of, I suppose, avoiding direct overlap, but also trying to complement actions that have been taken under that plan. We would have had an eye to the National Development Plan as well, and the funding that's available through that. And then the key policy documents that inform the final program design, you could say, with Smart Specialisation Strategy, only published this year, but we were involved in a lot of the work that went into developing that S3 document. And I should mention in particular the work that we did through an ETC funded project. We were a project partner in a project called Cohesion, which colleagues were very deeply involved in, and looked at the whole area of smart specialisation, and carried out an entrepreneurial discovery process in our region as well. That fed into the S3. So that's a requirement for ERDF funding, that before the adoption of the programme you have to have that smart specialisation strategy in place. And our regional programme, in particular, all of the actions we have around policy objective 1, which I'll come to, the research, development, innovation space, they must be aligned with that S3 strategy. The other, I suppose, policy document that we looked very closely at was the Climate Action Plan. And I'll talk to that a little bit further, but we're focusing on delivery of a particular action within that Climate Action Plan. And finally, the Town Centre First policy document that was only published this year, but again, something we've been involved with the policy formation, and we'd like to have a role in policy implementation here under the Town Centre First policy. So the actions we have under sustainable urban development try to deliver on that Town Centre First policy. Okay, next slide, thanks. So this is a high-level overview of what the funding looks like, the funding profile. We have 3 priorities. They're named SEM1, SEM2, and SEM3. So SEM1 is taking the bulk of the funding, and I suppose it's maybe important for you to know we don't have a huge amount of discretion in terms of how we allocate this funding. There are quite specific requirements in the regulations around minimum allocations to different policy objectives that are set out in the regulations, and there are requirements around the climate change contribution that is made by our programme. There are requirements around the intervention fields, the different types of actions that we can fund, and then there are very specific indicators that we need to select from as well. So there are quite a lot of different boundaries within which we have to work in the design of the programme. So look, just 54% of the funding is going towards this area of developing smarter and more competitive regions. By the way, I'm talking about the Southern, Eastern and Midland Regional Programme, but you'll see a very similar programme for the Northern and Western. It has a similar shape and funding allocation in terms of the split of funding. The priority 2, SEM2, is around creating greener, more energy efficient regions and a just transition. So I'll talk to that again in a minute. And then finally, we've allocated 14% towards supporting sustainable urban development in our regions. This perhaps is where we had a little bit of discretion. The minimum that we're allowed or required to allocate to urban development was, or urban and rural development was 8%. And we pushed that up to effectively close to the maximum that we could, while still having enough funding in the other 2 priorities. So the total allocation to priority 1 is 337 million. Priority 2 is just under 200 million, and priority 3 is approximately 90 million. Okay, next slide, thanks. So I know we've a mixed audience here, and some will be wondering how all this money gets out there into the region, and it happens in a number of ways, but primarily it's done through intermediary bodies or delivery agencies. So under Priority 1, SEM1, you see a list of actions there, but I might start in the next column, which is the ERDF grant awarding bodies. So these actions will all be delivered by national agencies. The Higher Education Authority will be an intermediary body. Science Foundation Ireland are an intermediary body, and Enterprise Ireland are an intermediary body. I jump over to the last column on the right in terms of the beneficiaries of the funding under this policy objective. There's a huge emphasis on the technological universities. So we've effectively new technological universities. I think CETU was officially launched there earlier this week, and that's the last of the technological universities to go through. So we see these as and not just ourselves, obviously the policy at regional and national level is to see that the new technological universities are engines for economic growth in our regions. So there's a big emphasis on building their capacity. Universities will continue to be major beneficiaries of funding under the regional programme. And then finally, there are DACs, designated activity companies, so effectively not-for-profit funding vehicles that are established to allow enterprises to collaborate together and draw down on funding. So they could be enterprise clusters or enterprise support initiatives, enterprise programs that are developed collaboratively by a group of enterprises within our regions. Just to go through the actions from the top, I've mentioned already capacity building within the universities and technological universities. So I'll talk a bit about the calls that will support that. But what we're trying to do is make sure that the strong capacity within our HEI sector to work, particularly to engage with industry, and not only with industry, but with SMEs in our regions. So when you look at the country semester, the country reports for Ireland and a lot of the needs analysis that's been carried out, while Ireland scores and our regions score relatively well on RD&I in investment by companies. If you take out the large indigenous and the multinationals, there's still I suppose a challenge to be addressed there in terms of indigenous SMEs in particular and their investment in RD&I. For them to engage with universities and technological universities in our region, those universities and technological universities need to build their capacity to be able to deal with larger volumes of SMEs. So that's part of the work that we're going to do. The TUs also have to step up in terms of they're going to be producing a far greater output of research, and that's important, and that's part of their growth journey. But we need to make sure that research is relevant and applicable within industry and within society. So part of our program is to support that capacity building to allow that to happen. You'll also see in the calls that I'll share on the next slide that there's a focus on accelerating the translation of research into commercial applications. And really what we're talking about there is technology transfer, various different actions that we can take to support technology transfer from the HEI sector into commercial application in our regions. There's also this area of supporting regional innovation diffusion and enterprise innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think maybe as I talk to the calls, you'll get a better idea of what we're talking about there. So I'll come on to that. And then finally, this is a key area for us, is strengthening and developing the regional innovation ecosystems that exist in our region. So again, I think probably what I'll do is I'll talk to that on the next slide, but what we're about is trying to promote innovation diffusion, to improve the innovation in enterprise, and to increase the level of entrepreneurship. Okay, next slide, thanks. sorry, actually, I'll come back to the policy objective 1 in a bit more detail on it's actually the follow-on slide from this, which is about the funding calls that will come. Just to cover off the other 2 priority areas, under our second priority, we're focusing on policy objective 2. Now, policy objective 2 includes, if you're familiar with the regulations, it has 8 different specific objectives, eight areas that we could address, ranging from renewable energy to the circular economy to blue-green infrastructure, energy efficiency. There are lots of different areas that we could focus on. But the scale of investment that's required and that's set out in the Climate Action Plan is absolutely enormous. And the resources that we have available under the regional programme are quite modest in relation to that scale of resources and investment required. So we're focusing on one specific objective, which is specific objective 2.8, which looks at energy efficiency. Within that, we're focusing on residential homes. So we're not looking at public buildings or energy efficiency in business. And even within the residential energy efficiency space, we're focusing on homes that are at risk of or in energy poverty. So despite a very large investment of nearly 200 million, we're only targeting that area. And we go even further in our targeting. We're targeting very deep retrofit within that space. So you just get a feeling for, I suppose, while it might look like a large sum of money, it's only scratching the surface in terms of what needs to be achieved to achieve the targets set out in the Climate Action Plan. And finally, under priority 3, we're looking at sustainable urban development. So again, we have a focus within this. We're trying to support the regeneration of key towns within our regions using a town centre first approach. And part of the reason for that very particular focus is, again, that the funds are relatively modest. Also, the Commission would have had a strong say in terms of they don't want to see that funding spread out too wide and diluted across the whole region. So they looked for this focus, if you like, that we would bring to this particular action. And also, look, I took account of other funds that might be available, exchequer funding that's available in the area of urban and rural regional development. So just to mention, we are the awarding body in those instances, and then the beneficiaries of the funding for energy efficiency in residential homes will go through SEAI, and they will procure the contractors to carry out that work. The funding for policy objective, for priority 3, sustainable urban development, well, we expect that to be channeled to local authorities and potentially others. That particular, I suppose, action isn't yet fully designed. So we'll come on to that. So next slide, please. One of my final slides. So you're giving me the 5-minute warning, Lisa, I think, are you? I think I'm going to hit that target, but I'll allow a minute for questions. So look, all of these actions are going to be delivered, most of them through funding calls. Now, most but not all of these are competitive calls. So you'll see the blue ones at the top being delivered by EI, the HEA and Science Foundation Ireland. They will be delivered through a series of funding calls, targeted calls to the beneficiaries we've talked about. And the first of those hopefully will get out the gate before the end of the year. The HEA one might follow early in Q1. EI needs-led innovation, I think, also probably likely to be Q1 of 2023. They might do a little bit better than that, and Smart Hubs the same. The next one might take a little bit longer. It's a complex scheme to design and to meet the ERDF requirements. So we're trying our very best with Enterprise Ireland, but that's a complex scheme to design and to get right. And then the SEAI scheme, that's a non-competitive call. The funding will be awarded to SEAI for that particular action. And finally, the Town Centre First, Sustainable Urban Development, that call is still very much in the early design stages, so it's going to be later next year before anything happens in that space. Okay, I'm on my final slide, Lisa, and I promise it'll be quick. Formal adoption of the regional programme will take place in the next few weeks, and then we're into program implementation. So a lot of that work has already started, and I'll leave the list there for you to look at. And just to mention that we're still completing and closing out the regional program for 2014 to 2020. So that's still a program of work that we have to engage in. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure. That's brilliant. So thank you, Enda, so much this morning for that really insightful presentation. So
and thanks all, and best wishes ever. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So we're actually at the end of the webinar now, everyone. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all our presenters today. We're so grateful for you all for making the time to be with us this morning and sharing your knowledge and expertise with our network.